In the twilight of the Edwardian era, the village of Grange in County Sligo, Ireland, received a strange visitor. He was an Oxford scholar by the name of Walter Evans Wentz, and he came to talk about the fairies. The academic had embarked on a multi-year quest to record the testimony of fairy believers. Time was of the essence. As the older Victorian generations passed away, the stories of peasants across Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Brittany, many of whom were illiterate, would be lost to time, because fairies were not always dainty, delicate creatures with butterfly wings. They were once the rulers of the wild, nature spirits of extraordinary power, often wielded capriciously, sometimes violently. These were not the flower fairies at the bottom of the garden. They stole babies, they caused famines, and yet, in other cases, they could be extremely generous to favored humans. They enchanted as much as they destroyed. But during the Victorian period, fairies underwent the ultimate transformation. This is how the fairies were sanitized. I'm Nicole Miras, and this is Fireside Fables. Walter Evans Wentz would become a major scholar of Tibetan Buddhism and an early translator of key texts into English, including the Tibetan Book of the Dead. However, his first love was fairy folklore. He published his dissertation in 1911, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, which has remained a staple of folklore studies ever since. To the villagers of Grange, being asked to divulge one's beliefs surrounding fairies to an Oxford man, no less, would usually be a non-starter. But this man wasn't from the British upper classes. He was an American, and his mother's family was Irish. Most of all, he approached his interviews with curiosity and respect. Due to these attributes, Evans Wentz gained the trust of older folks throughout Ireland, Scotland, Cornwall, Wales, the Isle of Man, and Brittany. Upon his arrival in Grange, Evans Wentz sought the advice of a local priest named Father Hines, who helped him to meet elders with vivid stories of the fairies. Hugh Currid, the oldest man in Grange at the time, was willing to open up after he learned that the scholar's mother was Irish. With his sister translating, Currid mainly spoke Irish, he told tales of fairy abductions. An old woman near Lochmore, where Father Patrick was drowned, who used to make her living by selling flax at the market, was taken by the gentry, and often came back afterwards to her 3 children to comb their hair. One time, she told a neighbor that the money she saved from her dealings in flax would be found near a big rock on the lakeshore, which she indicated, and that she wanted the 3 children to have. Patrick Waters, who lived about 2 miles from Hugh Currid, had his own tales of fairy kidnappers. A girl in this region died on her wedding night while dancing. Soon after her death, she appeared to her husband and said to him, "I'm not dead at all, but I am put from you now for a time. It may be a long time or a short time, I cannot tell. I am not badly off. If you want to get me back, you must stand at the gap near the house and catch me as I go by, for I live near there, and see you, and you do not see me." He was anxious enough to get her back, and didn't waste any time in getting to the gap. When he came to the place, a party of strangers were just coming out, and his wife soon appeared as plain as could be. But he couldn't stir a hand or foot to save her. Then there was a scream, and she was gone. The man firmly believed this and would not marry again. In many villages, Evans Wentz encountered people who claimed to have seen the fairies with their own eyes. For example, Neil Cotton, a 73-year-old from Tallaght, claimed that he witnessed his cousin being saved from fairy or fairyland when he was a boy. One day, just before sunset in midsummer, and I, a boy then, my brother and cousin and myself were gathering bilberries up by the rocks at the back of here, when all at once we heard music. We hurried round the rocks, and there we were within a few hundred feet of 6 or 8 of the gentlefolk, and they dancing. When they saw us, a little woman dressed all in red came running out from them towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Father saddled a horse and went for Father Ryan. When Father Ryan arrived, he put a stole about his neck and began praying over my cousin and reading psalms and striking her with the stole, and in that way brought her back. He said if she had not caught hold of my brother, she would have been taken forever. These examples barely scratch the surface of Evans Wentz's research, and if you're interested in this topic, I would encourage you to read the fairy faith for yourself. What I would like to point out is that although Evans Wentz collected these stories between 1907 and 1909, these older storytellers would have lived most of their lives during the Victorian period, and their accounts give us a window into the folklore of a fading world. And yet, for the Victorians of the middle and upper classes, a very different reality was emerging, one that would eventually lead to the child-friendly fairy of the 20th century. The 19th century saw the rise of the middle classes, rapid urbanization, and better medical care. Greater literacy gave a wider share of the population the tools to study the world around them. One example is the explosion of popular science, including interest in the study of insects, especially butterflies. The Victorian fascination with insects likely influenced depictions of fairies as little winged creatures. In any case, for these upwardly mobile individuals, fairies were increasingly regarded as superstition. And that's why by the end of the Victorian period, we get this idea that fairies are for children. And by the early 20th century, fairies were increasingly depicted as children. Before the Victorian period, we can find a rare early example of fairies being associated with childhood innocence. This is from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem Christabel, published in 1816. A little child, a limber elf, singing, dancing to itself, a fairy thing with red round cheeks that always finds and never seeks. This trend continued on the London stage. In 1856, the 8-year-old Ellen Terry played Puck in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the following year, her sister Kate played Ariel in The Tempest. Additionally, fairy pantomimes became a popular form of entertainment in Victorian cities, in which overworked and underpaid child actors played fairies for young audiences. Believing in nature spirits becomes difficult when trains and streetcars and eventually automobiles are your daily symphony. But fairies could still be part of city dwellers' lives, just as long as they acknowledged that fairies were fantasy. In 1858, George MacDonald published his novel Phantastes, which is one of the earliest fantasy novels for adults. Phantastes follows the 21-year-old Anados, who is whisked away to fairyland by a fairy woman. But different beliefs could be found in rural communities. And many in the 1800s still possessed moderate fear of the good folk, a term of appeasement if there ever was one. Where we really see this is in stories of changelings. A changeling is a fairy child who has been swapped for a kidnapped human. Sadly, in real life, changelings were often disabled children whose mental or physical disabilities placed them far enough outside the norm that they became victims of suspicion and, in some cases, abuse. In 1952, the classical scholar Gilbert Murray recalled that during his childhood in 19th century Ireland, for context, he was born in 1866, a child who was for some reason reputed to be a changeling, was beaten and burned with irons, the mother being locked out of the room while the invading fairy was exorcised, though unfortunately the child died in the process. This murder was not present in the legal record. It is possible that Murray may be misremembering a story that he heard as a child. One case that did result in legal persecution was the killing of Patrick Kern's 9-year-old son in Kilkenny. In 1856, his son was beaten to death by a fairy doctor in an effort to cure him of a fairy blast. The child, of course, did not survive. An autopsy confirmed that the boy had a massive brain tumor and would have died within a few weeks. His parents, who had no luck with actual doctors, grew so desperate that they recruited a fairy doctor instead. The Victorian period saw the evolution of the fairy in affluent urban circles, even as fairy dangers lingered in the countryside. There is one place in which these distinct interpretations of fairies collided, and this was in Victorian fairy painting and pre-Raphaelite art, styles that sometimes overlapped. You'll notice that these fairies are nowhere near as sweet as Cicely Mary Barker's 20th century illustrations. However, they possess some attributes of the flower fairies. Compared to the stories of villagers interviewed by Walter Evans Wentz, these fairies are smaller, sometimes as small as flowers. The iconic fairy paintings of John Anster Fitzgerald also possess a psychedelic quality. His depictions of fairies were influenced by his many trips to opium dens, that most Victorian of vices. But ultimately, it was the fairies of the Victorian middle class that would triumph. By the 1920s, when the Cottingley fairies came onto the scene, the public was already primed to think of these once indomitable nature spirits as little butterflies, the stewards of your tulip beds, shrunken down to fit the size of a suburban garden. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you subscribe and maybe even share it with a friend or two. Be well, and I'll see you next time.